Thank you for joining us here on PM Expert. There is a crisis. It seems like almost every day now we're talking about a crisis. Yesterday we talked about a crisis that has led to a coalition being formed, a rise in civic action. Today there's a real crisis. Which one is real? Well, if you are a student and a parent in a senior high school, so you'll probably be feeling what we are talking about, the food crisis in our senior high schools. But we need to ask a fundamental question. Whilst this crisis is hitting us in our schools, whether it's a food shortage, a food problem in the supply, it's now become pretty erratic, forcing some of the students to go hungry and feeding on very little. Does the current IMF bailout present an opportunity? An opportunity to finally review the free SHS. And that is based on assumption that the food crisis that we are currently experiencing is a result of the burden that free SHS, that policy, has placed on our finances. Well, I have guests tonight who will answer that question. Will they draw a direct link between the challenges we're experiencing currently and the free SHS? But the IMF bailout offers an opportunity. Government itself had said as part of their documents explaining what they're doing with the IMF, something that gives an indication of what they plan to do with policies like free SHS. And so we'll get to that at the end of this presentation. We're quickly going to run through for you today on this. So where are we tonight? We know that the senior high schools are on the verge of shutdown. Why do we know this? Because the conference, the conference of heads of assisted senior high schools have said so, particularly, more specifically, in the Eastern region. We were all alerted to the gravity of the problem by the Upper West Regional Chapter of CHAS. That's the conference of the heads of assisted senior high schools. So the public schools across the country at the senior high school level, their heads in the Upper West region first alerted us to the problem, and they gave a 7-day ultimatum, by the way, that expires in 48 hours. This is Friday. And they were very clear what that is, and that by Friday, they do not get the supplies they need to feed the children, your children, then they'll be forced either to close down the schools or ask for the parents to take the bill and feed their children themselves. And then today, another statement emerged, this time from the Eastern Regional Chapter of the Conference of Heads of Assisted Senior High Schools. Their statement was a bit more specific and gave us a bit more detail about the nature of the problem, right? Because it came today on the back of a promise by government, by the Education Ministry, that the crisis would have been resolved as of Tuesday. We know that they missed that promise. They missed that deadline because the food items were not delivered as promised by the Education Ministry. So what were the specific things that the Eastern Regional Chapter of the CHAS indicated as a problem? They talk about first, food shortages, right? We're now getting to know that the food shortage we are talking about today has been there, has plagued the schools for 2 years. That's not me saying it. This is the heads of assisted senior high schools in the Eastern region saying it. Take their word for it because they head the schools. So what we are talking about, they're saying, it's not a problem that had just emerged in the last few days. It's possible that it's become worse in the last few days, but it has been there for 2 years. Your children in the senior high schools, they've had challenges with food, according to the Eastern Regional Branch of CHAS, that they've had challenges for 2 years. They also told that supply hasn't been in line with the policy directive. So there's a policy directive that specifies how the food should be circulated, and they say it's a problem. Another thing that they talked about in the statement they issued is that releasing funds for perishables in the schools, again, has been in arrears, sometimes for over a year. And then there's this one here that grabbed my attention, reduce weight of food items supplied. So they want, for example, 50 kilograms of, say, rice. But what they get is 25 kilograms. That is what they mean by reduced kilograms. So give me 50 kilograms of rice, and then you give me 25 kilograms of rice. So again, they highlight this as a problem. And then they talk about non-payment and erratic release of funds. In fact, as we speak today, according to the Eastern Regional CHAS, This year, government is in arrears of 6 months. And the whole of 2021 too, there are arrears that are still need to be cleared. We'll get some clarity on the nature of this pretty soon when we speak to my guests on this. So they came to a conclusion, having looked at the problem, that if by Friday, this is 2 days from today, in 48 hours to be more precise, you don't solve the problem, as in government, don't bring the food that the kids need, the children need in the senior high school, they'll have no option than to recommend to the Ghana Education Service to close down the schools in the region. And secondly, get in touch with the parents to either feed their wards themselves or send them home until the situation is normalized. So that would mean effectively close down the schools. If you don't want the schools closed down, then let the parents take up the bill. But that is a problem with free SHS, because free SHS is taking up everything else, right? Feeding of the children, whether you're in boarding house or in day, everybody gets fed. Government is taking up the bill. The chart in the Eastern region says, well, where we are right now with the crisis on the hands with the food, if you don't fix it in 48 hours, then let the parents begin to bear the cost of feeding the children. The Education Ministry, PRO, has given some assurances after the first missed deadline of Tuesday close of day. He admits that there have been challenges with specifically financing, right? Financing. When he says delivery challenge, what he actually explained is the financing has been a challenge, and that there have been delay in the release of funds to suppliers to then supply the schools with the food items they need, the sugar, the milk, the rice, etc. The government has delayed in supplying. So the suppliers have said, listen, we are in arrears for more than a year. We cannot continue to supply the food to the schools, which really is a problem. At the heart of this is the buffer stock company that also is struggling to mobilize everything that the schools need and supply. So really, if you strip all this off, according to the spokesperson of the Education Ministry, it comes down to finance. And indeed, the chart of Eastern Region confirms that arrears is crippling the ability of the state to feed the children, your children, in the senior high school. So that's the problem. But then he assures that the Education Minister has stepped in after the first failed deadline and has now, as of yesterday evening, the trucks were being loaded with 10,000 bags of sugar and 5,000 bags of rice to be dispatched to the schools. I must tell you, we spoke to our correspondents in 3 regions: Eastern region, in the Northern region, and in the Upper West region. This is as of 5:30. And they all tell us that they checked with the schools. And many of the schools they checked, not all the schools in the region, but some of the schools they checked, say they are yet to receive the promised supply. So that is as of 5:30 p.m. Has it changed as of tonight? I don't know. Probably get some clarity on this pretty soon. The parents obviously have been speaking. They're speaking out about this. If you have a child in the senior high school, of course you speak out. And they've called for the closure of the schools. So they let my child come home so I can feed my child myself. Some have said, let us pay for the food. We can afford. Those who can afford say, let us pay for the food that our children need in the schools. But then there's a picture I need to paint for you, right? So how many students possibly are affected by this? You can take that from the total number that the free SHS is covering, 1.2 million students. This is according to the 2022 budget. That's how much we budgeted for. That's how many students we budgeted for. 1,261,495 students. Total number of students benefiting from this free SHS. So potentially, some parts of the country more acute. The problem with the food supply is more acute than others. But potentially, we are talking about 1.2 million students affected by the problem of feeding and food across the country. So that's a significant number indeed. But the question that has always been asked, especially now that we've surrendered to the IMF and say, listen, we are sick as a country economically, IMF bail us out, is the burden that the free SHS is putting on our public finances. Because if you look at this is from the Ministry of Finance. In billion, we are talking about in 2022, the budget is 2.3 billion just on the free senior high school funding. So that's a significant amount. Let's put that in context. The e-levy that the government touted as a solution to our current revenue challenges was expected to raise something close to 7 billion cedis, right? Just over 6 billion cedis. Now, if you consider that for 2022, same year that the e-levy was supposed to kick in and raise that amount, we are budgeting to spend 2.3 billion, possibly of that amount. We know that amount is coming from other places, but just in comparison, that tells you that the huge chunk of the money that we are raising as a country is going to the free SHS alone. Not the entire education sector, just the free SHS, right? That's a significant amount. And if you look at the trend, we've been spending this over the period. 2019, 1.68. 2020 is 2.43 in COVID, right? And then it dropped again to 2021 to 1.97 billion and gone back up. So this year is the second highest we've spent on free SHS since we started. And if you look at the weight of the education expenditure, so this year we're budgeting to spend 17.8 billion on education. So that's a significant amount we are spending on education. This is good actually, because the more you spend on education, it has rewards for you. Out of the 17, we know that more than 2 billion is for the free SHS. So the education budget is huge. What can you do about this in the midst of an IMF bailout conversation? So this is what the government had said, and you'll find this in a very bulky document that the finance ministry developed as a form of an explanation document about why government is approaching the IMF and what government plans to do to get IMF to commit resources to help us out of this economic crisis. In that document, it's an FAQ, frequently asked questions. In that document, the government asked the question, what are we going to do? Are we going to suspend free SHS or not? Government is categorical that we will not suspend, the government will not suspend free SHS. However, quote, government in its enhanced domestic program has started a review, so that's a key point, has started a review of these programs, and they mention including free SHS, to see how best they can be optimized and become more efficient. So this is an admission by government that in the context of an IMF bailout, because we want their support, as part of our enhanced domestic program, we will be reviewing the free SHS and other policies for two reasons: to optimize it and to make it more efficient. The question to ask is, so what will a reviewed free SHS policy look like, or what should it look like? The finance minister in 2018 gave us a hint what it should look like in an interview with City TV, and in which he says, persons with the means should be given the opportunity to pay fees for the awards, while the government collects data to determine which segments of society benefit from the free SHS policy. So that's his view, that one of the ways you can review this, give those individuals who can afford to pay, let them pay, right? Let them pay. Gather data to make it a bit more solid so you can target the policy a bit more. That was Colonel Friata's initial thoughts on this. So that could be one of the things the government can do now that our hands are tied and we're going to the IMF. So that's one. Another thing you could do is to do a separation between the tuition and feeding. Government could say, we are taking tuition, so the tuition will be covered by the policy, but feeding, as some of the parents are already asking for, the parents will take that up as part of their costs. So that will lessen the burden. And then you could also say, separate day students from the boarding students. Now, free SHS covers everybody else, right? So you can say, for example, that for day students, government is going to pay for you to go to school free of charge. But if you're in boarding house, then your boarding costs will be borne by the parents, right? So that is possible. These are possibilities when it comes to what we are going to do with reviewing it. I'll ask my guest first of all, should it be reviewed? But even before that, a question about the problems that we are currently talking about, the food crisis. Can you say it's a direct result of the burden of free SHS? If the answer is yes, so what do you do about it? Considering that we are currently having a conversation with the IMF for a bailout. My guests are joining me. I'm very delighted to say that Kofi Asare will join me. He's the Africa Education Ward. Professor Evans Mensah is a man that, of course, when it comes to education in this country, has shown a certain fortitude and is a preeminent brain in terms of trying to deal with the reforms, and he's been there, he's done that. I am very delighted that he can join us tonight for a conversation on a very important matter that affects our children, 1.2 million of them. And so I'm happy that Prof can share thoughts on this very important subject. We'll also get to speak to the CHAS themselves, because I want to understand the nature of the problem. And so hopefully by the time we end, we can get a clear picture of what possibly government could do with the program as we go to the IMF. Stay with me. After this short break, we are back with my guests. Professor Evans Mensah is a former Vice Chancellor of the University of Ghana, renowned educationist himself, and I'm delighted that he can join us for PM Express tonight. Prof, I'm grateful that you make time to join us. Also joining me in the studio is Kofi Asare, Executive Director of the Africa Education Watch. Hopefully we'll be joined shortly by the Eastern Region CHAS Chairman. They issued a statement today, giving us a better picture of the problem. Prof. Evans Mensah, I must say, I've read a lot of your articles and public assessments of the free SHS. Is it fair to conclude what I just illustrated and what we've heard from CHAS across the country, this food crisis, from what you understand of how the free SHS is structured, is it fair to conclude that it is possibly a symptom of the free SHS weight?
For having me this evening. I wish you had talked to the CHAS people before I come in, but all the same, I'll see what I can do about the question that you're posing. It's obvious. Some of us have been predicting this for several years since the program started, that if nothing is done about the sustainability of this program, we're going to get into a crisis. And it seems it is happening. The solution to the problems that you have outlined in your summary are all very simple. But what I'm afraid of is whether government will be prepared to accept those solutions. First of all, from time immemorial until this free SHS started, feeding of secondary school or high school children had been in the hands of heads of schools, headmasters and headmistresses. They made all the arrangements. They knew how to get their food. They knew who their suppliers were. Then we decided to centralize. The idea of decentralization, which we've been making a lot of noise about, seems to now be in the opposite direction. I don't see why schools in Bogatanga, Navrongo, Tumu should wait for buffer stock to give them supplies ostensibly from Accra before they can feed children. So, first of all, the heads should be given the freedom and the prerogative to run their schools. After all, if they are heads, they are supposed to be good in management. They should be given the chances of this micromanagement that goes from all the time from a centralized position. People always talk of the possibility of heads being corrupted. Of course, there may be a few cases, but majority of heads are very honest and they care about their school children. They wouldn't deliberately let the children go hungry. During the days when schools were feeding themselves from their own resources, you remember many of the schools even had their own school farms. They used to grow maize themselves. Some of them even produced enough to sell to augment the finances of their schools. They used to run poultry farms and were able to supply eggs to their students. Apart from giving the children some practical experience in agriculture, it also helped the schools to feed their children well. Now they have to sit and put their hands in between their legs and wait for somebody in Accra to determine when and where they are going to get their food supplies. And that's what is causing all this. Now, before you can do that, you also have to make sure that this policy, which now government seems to be thinking of accepting, that those who can pay should be allowed to pay. The schools will always have some money to keep the schools running, whilst whatever is due from government will come in, if children are paying for their own feeding. Tuition has always been free since Kwame Nkrumah's time. It is boarding which was costing parents all the time. Now, once government decided to take the burden of boarding, these problems were bound to happen. That's what I'll say for the meantime.
Very interesting point, Prof. Prof, please stay with me. I'll come back to your solutions pretty shortly. But Kofi, I know you are in touch with the schools, with the heads. The statement that we've seen already, is this painting an accurate picture or is it being exaggerated?
Well, I don't think for any reason that the heads of the schools who have played a key role in implementing one of government's most popular flagships and highly successful flagship will deliberately paint a negative picture.
And in fact, the opposite is true where they the heads rarely issue statements such as this.
Yes.
I mean, they are very private about, even when you call them,
yeah,
they will not talk to you.
Yeah, I know. You know, in the discourse surrounding the strike, teachers made a point that, look, government, we've been your key partner in the implementation of one of your most successful flagships since the beginning. And through thick and thin, running irregular timetables or calendars, they were changing calendars with sacrifice, and throughout the shortages and all the challenges with a new policy up to the 6th year, we've been in the trenches with you. And so consider this as part of our contribution and sacrifice and heed to our demand for the COLA. Teachers have said that. It is within the context of that statement that I find it totally unconscionable, or it will be unconscionable for anyone to believe or suggest that the head teachers are exaggerating. The head teachers are happy about the free senior high school program. The head teachers are happy because they are happy seeing children not being denied access to secondary education on the basis of cost. And they are happy because they are happy that they are seeing more and more children transiting from junior high school to senior high school.
So this is a real crisis.
So when they raise such issues, you should appreciate that they are raising these issues as professionals who are in charge of managing the schools. And they are saying that there are severe challenges with the disbursement and receipt of funds. And this is affecting their ability to buy food, especially their perishables, and deliver good to the students. They are saying that the suppliers that have been contracted by the buffer stock are not able to supply at the right quantity and also at the right time. And this is causing some students to feed without bread, to eat breakfast without bread. Some of them are not having sugar, and obviously they are not having the square meal they are supposed to get. And so they are pleading that government should do something about it because the issue has been going on for the past 2 years. This is a genuine call.
I can tell you a story today. We sent one of our reporters to the Eastern region because the statement came from the Eastern region. One of the schools now, they've substituted the maize, the banku, and everything else. Now they are buying gari because gari is cheaper. And so the students, just put the water in the gari and then you eat it with what you can find. Which has become the reality.
Yeah.
But Prof makes an important diagnosis. And I wonder, what was the rationale for dismantling the decentralized system and centralizing it with the supply of the food?
I had the opportunity of reviewing the free senior high school policy. Okay. the policy document. And it made justification for centralizing the procurement of foodstuff, which made economic sense.
Okay, so there's economics.
Yes, there is an economy of scale sense, in the sense that if one company is supposed to supply just 10 cartons of mackerel to Chifu Praso Secondary School, they will definitely buy it from Chifu Praso. The farthest they'll go will be Cape Coast. But if the one company is supplying mackerel to the whole region of about, let's say, 100 schools, they can import, because we don't produce mackerel here, or they can buy at factory price or at warehouse price and get it very cheap. Mm-hmm. And so that was one of the justifications for centralizing the procurement of some of the foodstuff. I believe that as a practitioner within the policy space campaigning for spending efficiency, economy of scale provided sufficient justification that we can centralize the procurement, because our interest is that spend, but as much as practicable, let's have high value for money. So if you are going to spend more, if procurement of mackerel, rice, tin tomatoes, these three for instance, is going to be high at the district level, but it's going to be high at the district level, then consider option B if it's going to be low. That is why I think that the justification on grounds of economy of scale made sense.
But this crisis, doesn't that disprove that theory? Because clearly, the funding challenges has emerged, and currently we are in a crisis. If you believe that the Charles statement, this has been there for 2 years.
You are not telling me that if we had, and I'm not against the decentralization of food. Mm-hmm. Since Kwame Nkrumah, food supply, procurement of food to senior high schools was decentralized. And we didn't hear any issues like we are hearing. So I'm definitely not making an argument against the decentralization of food procurement. The point I'm making is that the economy of scale argument made sense economically.
So why has it failed?
It has failed for a reason that the decentralized one would have also failed. Okay. Disbursement. What are we talking about?
So the money isn't there.
The free senior high school policy we're talking about is 70% feeding. The whole menu, the bouquet called free senior high school, is 70% feeding of students. That is in terms of the financial portfolio. And so anytime fund disbursement of free senior high school funds delays, for example, 2.3 billion budget for this year. Anytime there's a delay in the disbursement of that money, the first thing it affects, and what it affects most, is feeding.
Because that's a bulk of the...
Now look at the space. We are talking about 1.4 billion being spent on feeding in free senior high schools, in senior high schools. Out of the 1.4 billion, about 1.1 billion will go to buffer stock for the commodities that they supply through their contractors. And then the remaining 300 or so million will go to the schools to purchase the perishables. Now, this is the situation. If you look at the calendar of 12 months, for 10 months out of the 12 months, students are in school, either in part or in full. I'm talking about because you're running a track. So you either have some of them or all of them in school. But for 10 months, at any point in time, apart from Easter break, students are in school. The only time students are not in school is from the third and fourth week of December up to the second week of February. It means that if you do the projections carefully, Ministry of Finance will have to be disbursing averagely 100 million Ghana cedis every month from February to November to ensure that there is no disruption in supply. What we are seeing is not the case, and that is why the Ministry of Finance is owing suppliers to the tune of over 300.
So clearly, this is a financing problem.
It is a financing problem, which is actually a manifestation of a broader liquidity issue in the education sector. Don't forget that last year, at the end of last year, Get Fund, which is the biggest education sector envelope, Get Fund could not disburse more than 50% of allocated funds by the end of last year.
Because we've securitized it.
Because we've securitized it, one, because we've capped it at 25%, And because the 1.4 billion or so that was allocated last year was not even flowing.
Okay.
So the receivables were not coming. You understand? So the issue is that there is a general liquidity situation. Similar thing affected student loan trust fund because Get Fund also funds to an extent student loan trust fund. That's why we're having student loan agitation. So there's a general issue of liquidity in the economy. And the education sector being a 20% recipient of the budget will also...
Is free SHS then the main anchor that is dragging that problem down into the ocean?
I will say, I won't say that free senior high school, our secondary...
Is the burden becoming unsustainable?
Let me give you the bigger picture. Free senior high school is a microcosm of our secondary education budget. Note that the 2.3 billion is not how much you spend on secondary education. It's only free senior high school.
Free senior high school, yes. Out of the 17 billion that was budgeted.
There's another 2 billion, which comprises salary of teachers and other staff who work in senior high schools and other CAPEX-related expenses. So if you add it to the 2.3, you come to about 4.5 billion being spent. If you strike that percentage of the education budget, it's a maximum of about 24%. Okay, so it's a sizable chunk of money. Okay, but I won't say that free senior high school is a single issue in the education sector.
But
what I'd rather say is that because we are faced with liquidity issues and obviously we need to cut down on expenditure, the education sector budget is structured that some aspects of the budget are no-go areas when it comes to cutting. Out of 17 billion earmarked this year, 12 billion is going into salaries and compensation.
That you
can't touch it.
Yeah.
You understand? And even if you go to the goods and services, there are some aspects like capitation grants, etc., and you can't touch them.
That is an arrears too, by the way.
It's an arrears, though, yeah. So you realize that if you look carefully at the budget lines, if you look at the goods and service budget lines, the areas that you can touch, let me just make this correction, that there's an aspect of compensation you can touch, which is the teacher training allowance.
Yes.
Because we have indicated that that is not necessary in this time.
Now, yes.
So
you are for those who say scrap it?
Of course, of course.
Good. I'll ask Prof's view on that.
We've always said that. So, you see, there are aspects of the goods and service budget line that can be scrapped. But if you look at the goods and service budget line, it is mainly free scenarios.
Okay, so but let me narrow the question. The food crisis, is it a symptom of the free SHS bedding?
The food crisis...
Because you say it's a financing problem.
As a result of delayed disbursement of funds.
Yes, of course. But the free SHS means you're feeding everybody.
We don't have the capacity to fund it. We have said it that it is not financial. We've always said that the free scenario program is a laudable one, but we don't have the capacity to fund it in its current shape.
So you review it.
We have recommended to government
that
we need to have a discussion around means testing.
Okay, so stay with me, because I'll come to that, because the government has indicated as part of the IMF program in the what they call the enhanced domestic program that they would review. So I'll come to what should it look like. Prof, Prof, let's go back to the free SHS. You look at it as it is now. I mean, it's a funding problem. You've already said, look at it again. Do we have an opportunity to now that the IMF is wielding the whip over us, Government House says in that document that they've submitted that they are going to review. What should a review look like? What would you touch and what would you leave?
I wouldn't touch the idea in principle that some people can't afford school fees and need to be helped. But I will touch the blanket implementation of the program, that it must go to everybody. I believe that those who can afford must contribute. Their contribution can go into helping those who really cannot afford. Now, if I may go back to the economies of scale issue that Kofi raised.
Yes.
It cuts both ways. You know, what you save by bulk purchases, you may even lose more from the logistics and transportation. You bring everything cheaply to central point. And then you start distributing around the whole country. You know what transportation costs are now. By the time mackerel you have ordered cheaply from somewhere to Accra gets to Damongo, it may be more expensive than the Damongo senior high school headmaster buying the mackerel locally. That's the point I'm trying to make. So you may have the economies of scale at the central point, but by the time you've done your distribution, the cost of transportation, the delays, and the inefficiency in making sure that the food gets to the schools on time will make the whole thing nonsensical. So we will have to look at that again. That argument of economies of scale will have to be looked at again. If we cannot do it even district-wise or even school to school, we can sort of regionalize it. We have to do some decentralization and allow the heads to run the schools the way they want to.
Okay.
After all, there is a lot of competition for recognition. But if every headmaster is going to sit back and wait for somebody from Accra, you won't get that sort of competition for improvement of the schools. I hope you see the point I'm trying to.
Yes, so in fact, what you just suggested is one of the reviews you propose, which is that one,
yes,
go back to the decentralization policy. I mean, decentralize the distribution of food under the free SHS policy.
Yes.
Okay. What
especially if the students are going to pay their fees directly to the schools will have the money, especially for the purchase of perishables.
Okay.
They won't wait until government brings money from the Ministry of Finance, which may never come until the schools have even gone on holidays before they go looking for perishables.
Okay.
Because they will have money in their bank accounts already to meet those contingencies.
So one, decentralized. Two, I think you've also said that allow those who can afford to pay, that then will subsidize those who can't.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's the second suggestion. What else would you want to see with the free SHS?
Well, we have to work diligently towards this sort of staggered, entry, exit, yellow, green thing, and also make sure that the students get the real quantum of contact hours. And by contact hours, I don't just mean teachers going to stand in the classroom and teaching. You may teach in the classroom, but the child actually studies after class. So there must be enough time between lessons for the student to be able to engage and imbibe whatever has been taught in class. I think that is lacking at the moment. So students are rushing through a lot of material. And by the time the examination time comes, all they are looking forward to is, what can I punch so that I can pass the exam? And that is not good enough for long-term educational achievements.
Between the day and boarding, would you still say government in the midst of the crisis still fund everything, day and boarding, everybody else?
Once boarding is not funded by government, it means, the day students, tuition has always been free.
Okay. So
everybody will have free tuition, the money will go. Boarding, if you want your child to be in the boarding house, you pay for the food. If you don't want your child to be in the boarding house and you want the child to be in day school, depending upon distances to travel from home to school, sometimes even day students tend to spend more in terms of transportation and feeding themselves when they go to school. That's why a lot of parents rather prefer the children to be in boarding house, during which period they will just pay one fee and they know that the child will be fed. But if they are going to send their children to a boarding school and then be looking back and looking looking over their shoulder to think whether the child is being well fed or not, and going every week to give food to their children, then what have you achieved?
So just for clarity, so again, you're saying with let the boarding, pay the fees for everybody, but when it comes to boarding house, let the parents take up the feeding cost.
Ideally, that's what I would suggest. Of course, those on scholarship will have also the boarding paid for them by whatever body is giving them the scholarship,
Okay,
whether
so
government, private source, etc.
as it is now,
in the long run, someone has to pay for it.
okay.
But what I'm saying is that it shouldn't be an issue of government paying for it for everybody.
Okay. As we speak now, the free SHS is structured so that both day students and boarding students all get fed in the schools, right?
Yes.
Okay.
The day students get fed at least once a day.
Once. Okay. But let the parents, and in fact, we've had parents say in the midst of this crisis now that we want to take care of the feeding of our children ourselves. And so I guess that ties in with what you've just said.
Yeah, because they are running to the school every weekend, cooking rice, taking banku, taking kenke, going to Yamuransa to buy kenke to take for children to in infant swim. You know, it's happening all the time, and the stress that parents are going through. Gone are the days when your child will go to boarding school and you sleep. If there is PTA meeting, you go. In fact, many parents don't even go. And at the end of the time, you go and pick your child and bring him back to school. Bring him or her back home. You know, now there is stress all the time on teachers, on heads, on students, on parents. Why should it be so?
Prof, ultimately, I need to ask this question. Quality. Has free SHS then, in the midst of what the challenge we just identified, been good for quality or been bad for it?
I have always maintained, from the data that I have seen so far, that it has been very good for quantity. But as for quality, I really question it.
Okay.
Especially judging from the material we are getting in the universities. Of course, they come with what they call A's, A1, B2, B3, whatever. But when you get to the nitty-gritty and you get to them, of course, those who are good are extremely good. But majority of them, we have to reteach them. Okay. And I'm not the only one saying it. The teachers themselves are saying it because they know that they are not giving their children what their children really need. If you ask any teacher, he will tell you that they don't feel satisfied that they are giving their children what they really need. So we are half baking them. Quantity, yes. A lot of people have had the chance to go through the system, and that's very good. That's very good. But in terms of quality, there is a lot to be done.
You made a startling point there that at the universities now, the teachers are having to reteach the students coming. Okay.
Oh, yes. Every university lecturer will tell you.
In other words, the things that they should have learned in SHS, they are now having to relearn.
What they should have learned in SHS, they don't learn. What they should have learned in JHS, they don't learn, so they don't take it to the SHS. So SHS teachers are having to reteach people things that they should have picked up from JHS. Then when they get to university, and mind you, it's only those who really do very well who get to the universities.
Wow. But that paints a picture. So if your best are now having to be retaught, then that...
Exactly. You can imagine what you are putting into the general pool.
That's alarming. Okay, and very finally, and this is not on free SHS, but I need to ask you your thought, and before I come to Kofi, what do you make of, again, still within the IMF context, what do you make of the teacher training allowance? Should it go? Should it stay?
Well, I think the idea of withdrawing the teacher's allowance at the time it was done had a lot to go for it. Another government came and thought, no, I said it in my campaign, I said it in my manifesto, that I will restore the allowance. There are pros and cons for it, but if the IMF says, look, we can only give you the money to train the people, but the extra allowance, after all, the reason why the allowance was taken away was that before then, they were not tertiary institutions. Now they are tertiary institutions awarding degrees and diplomas. We are even lucky that up to now, the universities and technical universities have not started agitating that if the colleges of education and colleges of nursing education are getting allowances, we should also get allowance because we are all tertiary institutions.
Thanks, Prof. Kofi, so let's come back to, you say do means testing, so which means that you're also, edging towards review. Now we have an IMF bailout conversation happening. Government has issued a document saying, well, listen, we are reviewing the thing to make it, what are the words they use? Efficient
Optimized.
and optimized. Yeah. Okay. So what should it look like? Optimized and efficient. How does it look like?
Well, basically ensuring that there's value for money, because you are rationalizing your expenditure. That's what you are doing under the IMF. You are rationalizing your expenditure and ensuring that as much as possible spending efficiency is high, more than 80%. So what do? You look at areas that you think that you can be more spending efficient. I'm buying uniforms for children. Can't their parents buy the uniforms?
At SHS level?
Yes.
Seriously?
Buying uniforms for children.
And at the free SHS?
Yeah, uniforms.
I thought that is at the basic level.
No, that one has been cancelled. Uniforms and then even exercise books. Things that don't exist at the basic level. So isn't it possible for the parents to support that? Because the child was wearing uniforms in junior high school 3. So why can't the parents suddenly buy a uniform because the child has entered senior high school 1? You understand? So rationalizing expenditure more and optimizing the use of the resources means that, increasing spending efficiency and then also value for money. So yes, areas that we can cut without affecting equity and inclusion, without denying the poor access to secondary education. That is where what I believe should be done within the context of optimizing.
So specifically, Prof had laid out specifics for him. What would be yours? I mean, boarding house.
I think that
themselves.
The feeding. I think that the Ministry of Education, the GES, they are the experts. They can within 24 hours determine how we will know who is poor and who is not poor. Look, the LEAP program has been running for about 2 decades. Yes. Okay, but every month they disperse cash grants through SMS to the poorest of the poor in Ghana.
Yeah. The
Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection identified the poorest of the poor. That is why I am not receiving some of the cash grants. So we have capacity within our public service to do proper means testing. Under the Ghana Cares of Batampa, Ministry of Finance disbursed grants to people who were so hungry, people who were low income. They have their own way of determining that. So means testing is possible once there is a political commitment to do so. And I won't recommend how you should do it because we are tired of recommending them.
No, but if you're doing means testing, then your recommendation is that let the poor, cover the poor and let the rich pay.
Or for means testing simply means that identify those who cannot pay and pay for them. Those who cannot pay should not be excluded on grounds of cost. And identify those who can pay.
And let them pay.
That is all about it.
So your position is very aligned with the finance minister's first expression on this.
Of course, that allow those who can pay to pay. And then apart from that too.
And that's what I'm also saying.
Yeah, and apart from that too, have a procurement system for the food, because the food is key. Have a procurement system that makes procurement an economic sense. Because you are rationalizing expenditure and optimizing your resources, okay? So for you to achieve high levels of spending efficiency, you must adapt a procurement plan for your food, not because it is cultural, but because it makes economic sense. So if decentralizing it is what brings cost efficiency, fine. If centralizing it is what brings cost efficiency, fine. But at the back of our minds, let's know that we want to reduce cost, because the 2 words mentioned there are all about increasing cost efficiency and increasing value for money. But in the immediate term, the Ministry of Finance will have to, as much as practicable, respect the cash flow projections that the Ministry of Education has submitted to it.
Yeah, but if the money is not there, the money is not there.
No, I don't want to hear money is not there. There's money. We have priorities, okay? And I believe that the free senior high school is a priority of government because it is frustrating, okay, to put the managers of the free senior high school in the situation they find themselves in. The situation we find ourselves in, it's not a distribution problem. It is not a buffer stock problem or an education ministry problem. It's a finance problem. But when the issues happen, we go to the education because it's education.
True.
I want all of us to begin going to knock on the doors of the finance ministry and ask them, what is the problem? Okay. Because we need to disperse. And most importantly, as we are doing our media budget, I think that some of the pricing of the commodities, like rice and maize, are too low. Realistically, we know that food inflation is more than 30%. Okay. And so buffer stock needs the PPA to approve reasonable and realistic prices,
you get
so that you don't get people supplying food and the school saying that it's actually below the
weight that is.
So I think we can solve this. We are in this together. But no one should think that they are going to be trolled, for taking a decision that will not sound so.
I think there's consensus a bit around this table that definitely review the free SHS, change something about what it is now, make it more efficient and make it more
and let parents support government to make the policy sustainable.
Prof, I am extremely grateful that you joined me on this. I wonder if there's something more you want to say, especially with the IMF and education that's happening. We have to cut everywhere else. How much of the education should we cut?
Well, the only thing I would like to add to it is that government must have the political will and the determination to make sure that things work, so that we are all happy, the heads are happy, the children are happy, parents are happy, and the system works efficiently.
Absolutely.
I think we have the capacity to be able to do that.
Fix the problem.
We must do so.
Probably they should give you a call and see if you definitely you can assist. The capacity is there, Prof. If they are given a call, you definitely will offer, right?
Some of us, we are now considered to be over 80, so we are not that useful.
I doubt that very much, Prof. Very useful. With the thoughts you've expressed, I have just a second.
There's one thing a headmaster said, that I am happy the children are enjoying school, but it pains me that by keeping them in school and letting them go this hungry, they will rather not be too happy with us for giving them a free policy like this. Let's think about that.
Absolutely, Prof.
In the interest of ensuring that our students don't go hungry or
Kofi Asare, I'm grateful, Executive Director of Africa Education. Well, Professor Evans Mensah, who I'm absolutely convinced still has what it takes to help us. If indeed, at the time of crisis, everybody must come to the table. He says he's ready. I mean, forget about his age. Prof, I absolutely submit. I'm delighted that you joined me tonight and shared thoughts on this very important matter. Professor Evans Mensah is the former Vice Chancellor of the University of Ghana. Enjoy the rest of the evening.